Hey, hi, my name is Jessie, and this is my final project presentation. So I chose to interview Paul Borgmeyer. He is currently the Director of Research and Development at Ethicon. So he manages a team of engineers who produce electrosurgery equipment used by hospitals all around the globe. He also was the Vice President of Megadyne Medical Products for a while and an Assistant Professor of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Utah. I had a lot of fun talking to him, and I'm excited to get into the interview. So my first topic is expectancy theory from chapter 10 about employee motivation and performance. Expectancy theory suggests that motivation depends on two things: how much we want something and how likely we think we are to get it. And there's about a three-pronged process to expectancy theory. There is effort to performance expectancy, which is, will efforts lead to high performance? There is performance to outcome expectancy, which is, will high performance lead to a positive balanced outcome? And this is how much an individual values an outcome, which is the third prong to expectancy theory. First, here are some key points from the article I read by Reinhardt and Waba. In this case study, subjects were asked to rate tasks from very desirable to undesirable based on a positive outcome or a negative threat if the task was not completed. They were also asked to state if they believe motivation factors were true or untrue about their job, such as the harder I work, the better results I get. The findings did suggest partial support for expectancy theory across samples. However, this support varied between different companies and was relatively weak overall with a low predictive power. In my interview, I found somewhat similar findings. After explaining the concept of expectancy theory to Paul, he believed that employees sometimes operate on this theory, but not all the time. He was actually very similar to the textbook in his answer about individuals having different needs. So the first question I asked was, how do you ensure that employees believe their efforts could lead to positive balance outcomes? Similar to the article, he said there's not one theory applicable to all people and that many individuals vary in what motivates them. He said it's important to continuously interview your employees and find out what motivates them. Some people are motivated by money, some are motivated by time off, flexibility, freedom, or kudos from a job well done. It is important to align engineers with tasks that match their interest and skills. This way, you optimize what they want and the likelihood that they will get it. This relates to the Reinhardt article when it talks about how expectancy theory can be tied to utilitarianism, which is the idea that people will maximize their pleasure and minimize their pain. By finding people's desires, you can often optimize productivity. Okay, the second question I asked was, are there any strategies you or your company employs to improve expectancy theory and clarify performance expectations or goals for employees? One strategy Paul utilizes is checking up on his employees at least every week. He does this to show he's interested in their work, and it tends to motivate them more because they perceive positive balance outcomes if they get feedback or encouragement. This relates to the article when Reinhardt mentions that motivation to perform an action is derived from an individual's expected balance outcome, which is the value they see in a task. Balance and expectancy are actually intertwined to create this theory. But yeah. Another strategy Paul employs is known as the compliment sandwich. The company also does quarterly reviews on KPI to let employees know what they did good or bad, and this keeps them wanting to improve. So the third question I asked was, how do you handle situations where employees perceive significant obstacles hindering their ability to achieve intrinsic or extrinsic balance? The article talks about how there is also perceived intrinsic value that plays a role in our expectancy. This is the internal satisfaction we get from completing a goal. And when I asked Paul about how he deals with obstacles that impede on employees' intrinsic motivation, he talked about how if an employee expects they won't be able to deal with an obstacle, then they won't do good work. Therefore, Paul is very flexible and actually sees it as his main job to remove these obstacles so that his employees can do good work and achieve their goals. Overall, both Paul and the article prove that expectancy theory is not universally applicable, but can be a good tool when assessing employee motivation. The textbook also states that for expectancy theory to be more effective, the Porter and Lewis model should be applied. This is the idea that rewards must be equitable to performance, which is a great segue into my second topic, which is equity theory. So, equity theory contends that people are motivated to seek social equity in the rewards they receive for performance. So basically, people want input such as effort, education, loyalty to equal their outcomes, such as pay, opportunity, or freedom. They also want it to be equitable in terms of what their peers receive. This can affect behavior. If employees perceive like unfair treatment, they might put in less effort. We can talk about the article really quick. So the study applies equity theory to the issue of localizing healthcare workforce in Saudi Arabia. This case talks about how the theory can help managers identify solutions to employee recruitment and retention problems. Much of the healthcare workforce in Saudi Arabia are temporary foreign workers because a lot of the local workforce prefers to work for the public sector since the benefits and the hours are better. Therefore, healthcare managers must use equity theory to try and adopt similar outputs to the public sector. They must also work on creating a respectable reputation for healthcare workers among society. Now, I was really curious to talk to Paul because these disparities are varied between careers, and the results of this case study definitely support equity theory. But I wanted to hear how equity theory worked internally in a company between people with the same career. So the first question I asked was, can you give any examples of how you use equity theory? Basically, are there any examples of how you communicate the criteria and the rationale behind reward allocation to employees? Paul said that when he was a young manager, he did in fact lose some employees due to the fact that he wasn't making them feel appreciated. He talked about how everyone is different in the recognition they desire. Many engineers like to just do good work and get a small cash bonus, while others might like to be recognized in front of a group. So Paul does allocate cash bonuses to the workforce who takes on the most work. But many of his engineers who don't put in as many hours, they might have more free time with their family. So the statement, the harder you work, the more likely you are to get a bonus, is true for Paul's company. Paul will also give credit to his employees for good jobs or ideas. And if there's a failure, then he will take the blame for them. And this makes sure that the employees feel fairness because they get recognition for their work, um, but they also have support. I believe that Paul's statement supports equity theory because even though not everything is equal, reward is still equitable to effort. But yeah. And the second question I asked Paul was, are there any examples you can provide where employees perceive inequity in the workload or the distribution of resources? If so, how do you address them? Paul said that almost always there is inequity in his team's workload. Some people are really into their job and desire to take on bigger chunks of the project, while others put in hard work, but they play a different role based on their job function or personality. Some of the innovators might have less labor, while the completers have to fine-tune things in a more tedious manner. This relates to the Saudi Arabia case because in both situations, people just want the work they put in to be fair to others, in the outcome that they get. In Paul's case, same career, equity theory holds true. And in the Saudi Arabia case, public sector workers won't move to healthcare because its perceived fairness is not equal to that of their current career. So why would they want a job that's the same amount of work with less benefits? It just doesn't really make a lot of sense. So that's what I have on equity theory. Moving on to my third topic, I chose to focus on bounded rationality from chapter 4. So, bounded rationality is a concept suggesting that decision makers are limited by their values, unconscious reflexes, skills, and habits as a mechanism of the administrative model. And there's a chart at the bottom showing the administrative model, and this depicts that incomplete information can actually lead to bad decisions. So, the first question I asked Paul was, how do you prioritize information and determine what is essential when making decisions with limited time or resources? The Pedro and Stan article also touched on this. They talked about how decision making in crisis situations is depicted as challenging due to cognitive dissonance. Often, when under this kind of pressure, a decision maker will rely on bounded rationality or biases that they are comfortable with, leading to fast and frugal insights. And Paul actually had a great solution to making decisions under constraints. He said that, half of being smart is knowing what you are good at and where you lack knowledge or ability. So by being self-aware, you can get help and overcome the struggle of limited time and resources. Paul stresses the significance of trusting his team's ability. He has learned that giving employees the latitude to do things their own way often yields better results than micromanaging or imposing his own preferences. Ultimately, he sees empowering his team as essential for fostering innovation. And this actually kind of reminded me of the organizational structure simulation that we did, because in order to move from a functional structure to a matrix structure, it was necessary to give employees more freedom and autonomy. So Paul works at a pretty big company, and it seems like his team was structured in a more matrix way. But yeah. The second question I asked was, can you give any examples of technology or data-driven approaches you use to help overcome bounded rationality in the decision-making process? So Paul didn't really have any solutions that involved technology or data, but he did provide another great way to overcome biases. He says he makes it a habit to actively seek input from everyone, especially those who may be hesitant to speak up in larger groups. He also encourages individuals to share their thoughts privately after meetings, and by including diverse opinions, he aims to prevent decisions from being dominated by one powerful or vocal individual. And yeah, he likes to get a lot of input. Paul also often intentionally shares his own opinions last to avoid influencing others, and this kind of helps him let go of some of the internal biases that he might have had before hearing his team out. Um, but yeah, he wants to make sure all voices are heard. And Paul's solution actually aligned very closely to the article solutions. In crisis situations, the article suggests that there's a need for flexibility, creativity, and informed judgment. And having a high emotional intelligence over pure rationality becomes crucial for effective leadership during a crisis, and being able to let go of some of this biased rationality. But yeah, it seems like Paul had a very high EQ, and he actually mentioned that this is something that his company has workshopped with his managers. So that was actually cool to hear, and that it's actually something that's applied and being worked on in their company. But yeah, okay, let's have a look at our final topic, which is risk propensity from chapter 4. So risk propensity is the extent to which a decision maker is willing to gamble when making decisions. The first article I found talks about a new agency started by President Joe Biden's team that aims to change how we fund medical research. Some people think that the old way is too slow and safe, and instead of playing it safe, they want to fund projects that are risky but could have big rewards. However, some critics are not sure if this risky way of funding will work for medical research. I also used Stoltz's article on mismanaging risk to back this up from a more business perspective. So the first question I asked was, how would you describe your personal approach to risk when making decisions, and how does it influence your leadership style? Paul stated that he cannot compromise on the final quality of their product, but he is open to taking calculated risks in the early stages of the project design process. These risks may involve reusing designs, making decisions based on incomplete information, or proceeding with untested ideas. Paul cannot compromise the integrity of electrosurgery equipment, but he also wants speed. Like in the article, when the National Institute of Health takes big risks, but ultimately they cannot release a drug to the public that has unknown errors. And haste to bringing products to the market is actually an example of overlooking notable risks from Stoltz's article, and this can be detrimental to your product. The second question I asked was, how do you handle situations where team members have different risk propensities and their preferences may conflict with the overall goals of the organization? Paul talked about the importance of understanding each employee's strengths and tendencies when assigning projects. Some job functions require more risk, while others require more accuracy. The article talks about taking big risks for big rewards in the biomedical industry. And it's okay to take risks when innovating a drug or electrosurgery equipment, but proper testing and safety measures need to be taken before it's released. So when it comes to the function of security for the users, you can't take risks. And the last question I asked was, how do you assess and evaluate risks when faced with decision-making scenarios, particularly those involving a lot of uncertainty or ambiguity? And for this question, Paul emphasized that product safety is the #1 focus of their company. He says always trust his instincts, and he doesn't succumb to peer pressure, even if it means halting progress or seeking further clarification. By prioritizing product safety and listening to his employees' concerns, he aims to prevent potential issues and maintain ethical standards within their organization. The Stoltz article also talks about how overlooking concealed risks and not managing risk in real time um, are both examples of cutting corners that Paul says is unacceptable in his line of business. So overall, Paul enjoys taking risks, but not ones that sacrifice his moral standard. In conclusion, I really enjoyed interviewing Paul. It was really interesting to dive deeper into each of these theories or themes and get real life sorry, I'm in a classroom, real life proof or examples of how they work. Often Paul's answers align pretty similarly to the articles, but didn't always support the theories. There was a lack of support for expectancy theory, while other theories or themes such as equity theory, bounded rationality, and risk propensity had a lot of great support and examples. So thank you for listening. Here's my reference page, and yeah, I'm gonna stop the share now.